He wasn't searching for anything, just a veteran Navy SEAL and his dog, passing through another quiet forest until the dog stopped. Not in fear, but like it had been waiting for this moment all along. Deep in the trees, they found a rusted ship that should never have been there. Inside, something wasn't hunting them. It was showing him a past he thought was gone. A choice he once made, now standing in front of him again. And this time, one step could either save him or erase him completely. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. Caleb Vance had been living out of motion for so long that stopping felt less natural than sleeping in the rain. At 43, he still carried the kind of body that told the truth before he ever spoke. He stood 6'1", broad-shouldered, hard through the chest and back. Built not like a bodybuilder, but like a man who had spent years teaching his muscles to obey faster than fear. His face was angular, cut with a clear jawline and the light roughness of beard stubble that never quite became a full beard. Deep blue-gray eyes sat beneath a brow that always looked as though it were studying the horizon for trouble. His short, dark brown military haircut had early silver at the temples, and the streaks did not make him look older so much as weathered. The olive field jacket on his shoulders had been worn long enough to know the shape of him. Beneath it sat the red and dark blue plaid shirt he always wore, sleeves rolled when the day grew warm. Dark blue cargo pants, worn brown leather boots, an old military watch with a scratched face, a pocket knife, and an Eberlestock half-track backpack completed the whole of his portable life. He looked like a man who had once belonged to an organized world, and had since stepped outside it on purpose. Beside him moved the only constant he had left. Orion, a German Shepherd K9 in the prime of late working age, moved with disciplined, silent precision through the thin morning mist. The dog was 5 or 6 years old by the look of him, black and tan with a dense short coat that held a healthy dark sheen even after days on the road. His frame was balanced and muscular, compact in a way that promised strength without waste. His eyes were what most people remembered, deep, focused, almost unnervingly intelligent. Orion did not fidget. He did not bark at leaves or chase ghosts for the fun of it. He watched. He measured. He made decisions. The black tactical harness fitted over his shoulders carried a clear patch. K9 Orion. They had crossed 3 states in 18 days. A stretch of highway in Pennsylvania, county roads in upstate New York, a short-term roofing job near a lakeside town where Caleb kept to himself, took cash, and left before anyone learned enough to ask questions. There was a worn map folded into the side pouch of his pack, though he rarely needed it. He followed weather, instinct, and the quiet urge to keep moving. That urge had brought them north again, into a forest where the early autumn light fell through the canopy in soft gold shafts, turning the air itself into something visible. The road that led there was narrow and cracked, bordered by old stone walls half swallowed by moss. The kind of place that looked bright and clean at first glance, then gradually revealed a silence so complete it pressed against the ears. Caleb parked his aging truck beside a turnout and shut off the engine. For a moment, neither he nor Orion moved. He listened. Wind through high branches, a distant water bird, the dry ticking sound of the engine cooling. Nothing wrong, nothing obvious. And still, something about the place felt too still, as if the forest were not asleep but waiting. He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck, and muttered, "Rest stop, not a prophecy." Orion jumped down first. The dog's paws landed softly on the damp earth. He stood beside the truck and looked toward the trees, ears forward, body calm but alert. Caleb shouldered the half-track backpack and started toward the small ranger station visible through the pines. It was little more than a weathered cabin with a green metal roof and a hand-painted wooden sign out front. A government vehicle sat parked beside it, dusty and scratched, as though it had spent more time on logging roads than pavement. The woman who stepped out when he approached had the grounded look of someone who spent most of her life outdoors. Lila Mercer was in her mid-30s, around 5'7", lean and strong, with the easy balance of a person used to uneven ground. She wore a moss-green Ranger parka over a gray sweater, dark outdoor pants, and waterproof brown boots muddied at the soles. A small field backpack sat near the porch steps beside a radio and folded topographic maps. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled back low, practical and loose in a few strands around her face. Her features were sharp rather than soft, but not unkind. Her eyes were quick, alert, and tired in the particular way that suggested too many long days and too many unanswered questions. She took in Caleb first, then Orion, then the truck, in that order. "You passing through?" she asked. "Or making camp?" "Passing through," Caleb said. "Thinking about one night, maybe two." Lila nodded, but her gaze slid back to Orion. "Good dog." "He knows," Caleb replied. One corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The good ones usually do. She gave him the usual warnings first. Fire restrictions, no hunting in the reserve, logging roads to avoid after dark. Then her tone shifted, almost casually, the way people speak when they are pretending not to test whether the listener will laugh. "This forest used to be a river channel," she said. "A long time ago. The old maps show it. The land changed, the water moved, and the trees took everything back." Caleb glanced toward the woods. "That's your polite way of saying it's easy to get lost?" "It's my polite way of saying strange things don't always stay buried here." He looked at her fully then. Lila folded her arms. 3 people in the last 4 years. Gone. No bodies. No camps left behind. No blood. No signs of animal attack. Just tracks that stopped making sense. Caleb had met enough locals in enough towns to know how stories grew roots. Missing hunters became legends. Bad weather became curses. A twisted ankle became an omen. But Lila did not sound excited by her own warning. She sounded worn down by it. "You believe that means something?" he asked. "I believe patterns mean something." She paused. "And I believe dogs notice what pride makes men ignore." That got the faintest hint of dry humor into Caleb's eyes. "That's so? That's so." Orion had been standing beside him the entire time, still as carved wood. Now he moved one step forward and fixed his stare past the ranger station, deeper into the trees. Not tense, not agitated, just focused, as if he had heard a distant command only he recognized. Lila noticed. "Has he done that before?" Caleb looked down at the dog. "He stops when something feels wrong." "Wrong dangerous?" "Sometimes." Caleb adjusted the shoulder strap of his pack. "Sometimes just wrong." Lila hesitated, then stepped back into the station and returned with a laminated trail map. She pointed out a narrow service track leading toward an old survey clearing where travelers sometimes camped. Her finger paused near a section unmarked except for contour lines and a faded notation almost rubbed away by years of handling. "Stay east of this," she said. "What's west of it?" "Old river cut, unstable ground." Then, after half a second, she added, "And a place I don't like." Caleb almost asked why. Almost. But he had spent years learning that when a stranger offered fear in a measured tone, it was best not to pry unless you were ready to inherit part of it. He took the map, thanked her, and returned to the truck with Orion pacing at his side. By noon, he had set a small camp in the clearing Lila mentioned. No tent. Just a tarp line in case the weather turned, a bedroll, a small fire ring, water boiled and filtered, gear placed with unconscious precision. The sort of camp a man built when he trusted routine more than comfort. The clearing itself was beautiful in a way that almost made caution feel foolish. Sunlight spilled through maples, beginning to gold at the edges. Ferns crowded the ground in thick green layers. Somewhere unseen, water moved over stone with a low, steady murmur. The whole forest smelled of pine, damp bark, cold earth, and the faint sweetness of leaves beginning to die. Caleb sat on a fallen log and ate from a tin cup while Orion lay nearby. Or rather, Orion appeared to lie nearby. The dog's body was down, but nothing else about him was resting. His head remained lifted. Ears flicked once, then went still. His gaze stayed locked on the western edge of the clearing. Caleb followed that gaze and saw nothing except trunks, light, and drifting insects in the sunbeams. He looked back at Orion. "You going to tell me what your problem is?" Orion did not move. The old ache in Caleb's shoulders settled in the way it always did when he stopped traveling long enough to feel his own body again. He rubbed one hand over his jaw, stared into the trees, and let his thoughts drift where he usually refused to let them go. Not all the way back. Never all the way. Just close enough to feel the outline of old guilt pressing under the ribs. He had built his life around not standing still long enough for memory to catch up. Some men drank, some talked too much, some found religion. Caleb drove, worked, slept lightly, kept moving. It was not peace, but it was manageable. Orion rose so suddenly, Caleb's hand went to the knife at his pocket out of pure instinct. The dog took 3 steps toward the western tree line and stopped. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked back at Caleb. Not a command, not panic, a question. That was the moment the forest changed. Not in sound, not in light. The afternoon remained bright, almost tender. But Caleb felt the small hairs lift along his forearms beneath the jacket sleeve. Something in Orion's posture made the air sharpen. He stood. "What is it?" Orion moved forward again, disappearing between 2 pines at the edge of the clearing, then reappearing just enough to make sure Caleb was following. Caleb swore softly under his breath, grabbed the map, and went after him. The ground sloped lower than he expected. Ferns thickened. The earth underfoot grew darker and damper, threaded with old roots and broken stone. Here and there, Caleb noticed details that did not fit the natural rhythm of the place. A section of iron half buried in moss, a shape beneath vines that might once have been a rusted cable, a rotted timber too straight to be ordinary fall. Orion kept moving with measured certainty. Then he stopped dead. Caleb came up beside him and looked through the trees. At first his mind refused the shape because the shape did not belong there. It rose out of the forest like a relic from a drowned world. A massive rusted ocean ship stranded impossibly deep among the towering northern trees. Its steel hull was half devoured by moss, vines, and hanging roots. Great trunks had grown up around it and through it, as though the forest had spent decades trying to absorb the thing. And had not yet succeeded. Soft shafts of sunlight poured through the canopy and struck the ship's corroded sides in pale gold, making the decay look almost sacred. The name on the hull was still visible beneath rust and green overgrowth. Aurora. Caleb did not realize he had stopped breathing until he heard himself inhale. Orion stepped in front of him, not growling, not barking, just standing there, body solid and absolute, blocking the path to the ship as if he understood before Caleb did that whatever waited ahead had not been waiting for the dog. It had been waiting for the man. Morning did not arrive all at once in the forest. It seeped in. Light filtered down through layers of leaves, pale at first, then slowly warming into gold. Mist clung low to the ground, drifting between roots and broken stone like something that had forgotten where it belonged. Caleb Vance woke before the sun fully reached the clearing. He didn't need an alarm. Years of training had turned his body into one. For a moment, he lay still in his bedroll, eyes open, listening. The forest carried sound differently at dawn. Subtle, honest. No deception in the way wind touched branches or insects shifted in the undergrowth. Nothing moved wrong. Nothing except Orion. The German shepherd was already standing at the edge of the clearing. Not pacing. Not restless. Waiting. Caleb pushed himself up, rolling his shoulders once, feeling the familiar pull of old strain along his back. He reached for his watch, still ticking, still reliable, and glanced at the time. Early. Too early for decisions. But Orion didn't deal in convenience. Caleb stood, laced his boots, and slung the Iberly stock half-track over his shoulders. He didn't ask where they were going. He followed. Orion moved at a measured pace. Not tracking prey. Not exploring. Leading. That was the difference. His head stayed level, ears forward, body aligned with a direction that did not waver. He didn't check behind him often, only enough to confirm Caleb was still there. And Caleb trusted that more than he trusted himself. The forest thickened as they went deeper. Fern beds gave way to heavier undergrowth. The soil underfoot softened, darker, richer, like it had held water once, long ago. Tree trunks grew wider, older, their barks split with time. Here and there, Caleb noticed remnants that didn't belong to nature. Rusted fragments of metal embedded in roots, lengths of corroded cable half swallowed by moss. Shapes that might have been man-made once, but had long since surrendered to the forest. He slowed slightly. That wasn't random. That was a pattern. Orion stopped. Not abruptly. Just ended his movement. Caleb stepped beside him. And then he saw it again. The ship. It was impossible to take in all at once. Even standing there, even seeing it clearly now in daylight. Caleb's mind resisted accepting it as real. The hull rose massive and corroded, its steel skin eaten by rust and layered with green life that had claimed it inch by inch. Thick vines draped from the upper decks like ropes abandoned mid-use. Tree roots curled around the lower structure, some of them having grown directly through open windows and broken panels. The name was clearer in the morning light. Aurora, not painted anymore, just barely surviving. A memory etched into metal. Caleb stepped forward. Orion didn't. The dog remained exactly where he stood, his body angled just enough to block Caleb's direct path. "Yeah," Caleb muttered under his breath. "I see it." But seeing wasn't the problem. Understanding was. He moved a few steps to the side instead, circling slowly, approaching at an angle. Orion allowed that, but followed, staying slightly ahead, never letting Caleb close the distance directly. That was new. Caleb had seen Orion hesitate before. He had seen him alert, aggressive, even defensive. But this was refusal. The ground around the ship told a story, and like most stories worth listening to, it wasn't clean. Caleb crouched near a patch of disturbed earth. His fingers brushed lightly across the surface. Old impressions. Not fresh. Boot marks, maybe. Years ago. But they didn't lead away. They ended. He stood again, scanning the base of the hull. There were no drag lines. No deep gouges in the earth. No collapsed tree lines that would suggest something this large had been forced through the forest. It hadn't been dragged. It hadn't been rolled. It hadn't been moved. And yet, here it was. Caleb exhaled slowly. "All right," he said quietly. "So that's not normal." Orion shifted his weight, a subtle movement. But enough Caleb approached the ship's side. The metal smelled faintly of rust and damp decay, mixed with something else. Something older, harder to place. He reached out and touched the hull. Cold. Not just from the morning air, a deeper cold. The kind that didn't belong to sunlight. He moved along the length of the ship, eyes scanning for entry points. Several openings had formed over time. Collapsed panels, broken doors, sections where the structure had simply given up resisting the forest. One of them led into what had once been a lower deck. Caleb stopped there. Orion did not move forward. Instead, the dog stepped slightly in front of him again. Not aggressively, just enough. Caleb looked down at him. "You're not liking this." Orion held his gaze. There was no fear in those eyes. Only calculation. And something else. Recognition. Caleb stepped past him. Slowly, deliberately. Orion did not block him this time, but he did not follow. Inside, the air changed. It felt heavier. Not stale, not suffocating, just thick. Sound dampened. Even Caleb's footsteps seemed quieter, absorbed by the structure around him. Light filtered in through broken panels and gaps in the hull, creating uneven patches of brightness that cut across shadow. The interior bore signs of time, but also signs of something else. Not chaos, not decay alone. There were patterns. Caleb moved deeper, eyes scanning everything with trained precision. A section of wall where something had been repeatedly struck or scraped. A metal railing worn smooth in one specific spot, as if hands had gripped it over and over again. Scratches along the floor, not random, but directional. Movement. Repetition. Habit. He crouched near one of the marks, tracing it lightly. Not animal. Not entirely human either. Or maybe just desperate human. Further in, he found the radio. Mounted crookedly against a panel that had partially collapsed, the unit looked ancient, far beyond anything that should still function. Wires hung loose, some exposed, others wrapped in layers of makeshift repair. And yet, a faint flicker of light pulsed from within. Caleb leaned closer. "Shouldn't be working," he murmured. He didn't touch it. Not yet. Behind him, Orion let out a low, controlled sound. Not a bark, not a growl. A warning. Caleb turned sharply. The dog stood at the entrance, rigid, eyes locked on something deeper inside the ship. Not on Caleb, not on the door, but past him. For a brief moment, Caleb felt it too. Not a sound, not a movement, but a presence. Like someone had just stepped into the room and chosen not to be seen. Then, it was gone, or maybe it had never been there. Orion did not relax. Caleb straightened slowly. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "We're not alone in this." But the words felt wrong the moment he said them. Because there was no evidence of anyone else. No fresh tracks, no voices, no breathing. Nothing that a trained man could point to and say, "This is real." And yet, Orion had reacted. And Orion did not imagine things. Caleb stepped back toward the entrance, not retreating, reassessing. He stopped just before reaching Orion and looked back once more into the dim interior. The radio flickered again, faint, inconsistent, but alive. That was enough. For now. Outside, the forest felt different. Brighter, yes, but also thinner. Like the ship behind them had taken something with it from the air. Caleb exhaled and adjusted the strap on his backpack. "We're not done here," he said quietly. Orion did not respond. But he stepped beside Caleb again. Close. As if confirming something. They circled the ship once more before pulling back toward the tree line. Caleb moved slower now. Not because he was afraid. Because he was thinking. Everything about the place suggested time, old riverbeds, forgotten routes, structures left behind. But the ship suggested interruption, something that didn't belong to the natural flow of anything, something inserted or held. At the edge of the clearing where they had first seen it, Caleb stopped and looked back one last time. The Aurora stood silent, massive, unmoving, and somehow watching. He shook his head slightly, more to himself than anything else. "All right," he said. "We'll do this properly." Orion's ears flicked once. Agreement. They turned and made their way back through the trees toward camp. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Because for the first time in a long while, Caleb Vance was not just passing through a place, he was about to stay. Caleb Vance did not believe in haunted places. He believed in patterns. And the moment he stepped back toward the ship that afternoon, what he saw inside the hull of the Aurora was no longer just strange, it was structured. That made it worse. The forest outside had warmed under the midday sun, but the air inside the ship remained cold in a way that didn't match the temperature outside. Not freezing, not unnatural enough to trigger instinct alone. Just wrong in a quiet, persistent way. Caleb ducked through the opening again, slower this time, deliberate, measured. His boots made soft contact against the metal floor, the sound muted as though the ship itself absorbed it. Behind him, Orion stopped at the threshold. The German shepherd lowered himself into a controlled down position just outside the entrance. His body was still, but not relaxed. His ears angled forward, his gaze fixed entirely on Caleb, waiting, watching, guarding. Caleb didn't look back again. He already knew Orion wouldn't follow. Inside, he began mapping the space. Not with paper, not with markers. With memory. Every hallway, every turn, every obstruction, every exit. That was how he had survived for years. He moved deeper along the lower deck, passing rusted panels and warped railings. The smell of damp metal mixed with something else, faint, almost untraceable, like the ghost of burned circuitry. The scratches he had noticed earlier appeared again. More of them now. Closer together. More intentional. He crouched beside one section of wall. The marks were not random. They followed a rhythm. Short, short, long, pause, short, long. His fingers hovered just above them. "Not language," he murmured. Then after a moment, memory. He stood and continued forward. A narrow corridor led toward what had once been a central operations area. The doorframe was bent inward slightly, as if something heavy had struck it from the other side long ago. Inside, the room opened wider. Broken equipment, collapsed panels, a chair bolted to the floor, still intact, its metal legs fused into place by rust and time. And the radio. It sat crookedly against a half-fallen console, wires exposed, some rewrapped with cloth and tape in crude attempts at repair. The casing was cracked, the dials worn smooth. No modern unit would have lasted this long. And yet, a faint pulse of light flickered from within. Not steady, not reliable, but alive. Caleb approached slowly, stopping just short of touching distance. He tilted his head slightly, listening. At first there was nothing. Just static, thin, weak, intermittent. Then, a shift. Not a voice, not yet. But something beneath the noise, a pattern trying to form. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had heard things like that before. Not in places like this, but in moments where reality blurred at the edges, when exhaustion and memory collided just enough to distort what was real. He didn't reach for the radio. Instead, he stepped back, observed, waited. The marks on the wall were not the only ones. Now that he was looking for them, Caleb began to see repetition everywhere. On the floor, on the edge of the console, even along the inside of the doorframe. The same pattern, repeated, over and over again, as if someone had been afraid of forgetting something, and had chosen to carve it into everything around them. Time moved differently inside the ship. Caleb wasn't sure how long he had been standing there when he realized the light had shifted. Not dimmer, just angled differently. He checked his watch. More time had passed than it should have. That didn't make sense. He turned toward the entrance, still visible, still open, still safe. The radio crackled, not loudly, not suddenly, but clearly enough that it cut through everything else. Caleb froze. Static twisted, tightened, and then, for the briefest second, a voice came through. Not calling, not shouting, just speaking, soft, close, as if someone stood right beside him and chose to whisper instead of be seen. The words were incomplete, broken, but one fragment reached him intact. Not the first. Then silence. Complete. Total. The radio went still. Caleb didn't move, because for the first time, this wasn't memory. This wasn't imagination. That voice hadn't come from inside him. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "All right," he said under his breath. "So, something's here." Not someone, something. That distinction mattered. He moved again, slower now, more cautious. The room no longer felt abandoned. It felt used. Not recently, but not forgotten either. Caleb shifted his focus to the structure itself. If something had been here, it had moved. And if it had moved, it had left traces. He began checking sight lines, corners, entry points, angles of movement. That was when he noticed the floor near the far side of the room. Not scratched, not worn. Different. A section of metal plating sat slightly uneven compared to the rest, subtle. Easy to miss. But not to him. He approached, crouched, and pressed his hand lightly against it. Hollow. He leaned closer. There, a seam, a hidden access point. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "Of course," he muttered, because places like this never kept their secrets on the surface. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he stood and stepped back again, letting the space settle in his mind. The radio, the marks, the hidden compartment. None of it felt random anymore. It felt connected, like pieces of a system he hadn't fully understood yet. He turned and made his way back toward the entrance. Each step measured, each breath controlled. The outside light grew stronger as he approached. And then, he stepped out. Orion stood immediately. No hesitation, no delay. The dog moved closer than before, his body aligning with Caleb's side, not just watching now, but anchoring. Caleb rested a hand briefly against the dog's neck. Not a command, not reassurance, acknowledgement. "You heard it?" Caleb asked quietly. Orion didn't respond, but his eyes didn't leave the ship. Caleb looked back once more. The Aurora stood exactly as it had before, silent, still, unchanged, and yet not empty. He adjusted the strap of his pack. "There's more in there," he said, not to Orion, to himself. The forest shifted around them as the afternoon wore on, shadows stretching longer, light thinning into something cooler. Caleb turned away from the ship, not because he was finished, because he understood something now. This wasn't a place you rushed. This was a place you prepared for. They walked back toward camp in silence. But this time, Caleb wasn't just thinking about what he had seen, he was thinking about what he hadn't, and what that might cost him. Night settled into the forest like a decision that could not be undone. It did not fall suddenly. It pressed in. Light drained slowly through the trees until only fragments remained. Thin strands caught between branches, fading into a dim gray that made distance hard to judge. The air cooled, carrying the scent of damp bark and old water. Even the insects seemed to quiet, their usual rhythm replaced by something more restrained. Caleb Vance stood just inside the hull of the Aurora, watching that change take hold. He had made his decision before sunset. He was staying, not because he underestimated the danger, but because he understood it well enough to know that retreating blindly through unfamiliar terrain at night would be worse. This was controlled risk, and Caleb preferred risk he could measure. He moved with quiet efficiency. First, he chose position. The lower deck near the entrance offered a balance. Line of sight to the outside, limited angles of approach, enough structure to provide cover if something moved where it shouldn't. He cleared a small section of debris, enough to sit, to move, to react. Then he marked exits. One primary, the opening he had entered. Two secondary, collapsed sections further down the hull, narrower but passable. He mapped them in his head. Step count, direction, obstacles. That was how you stayed alive. Orion remained just outside the threshold. The German shepherd had not crossed into the deeper interior all day. And now, as darkness approached, he seemed even more anchored to that invisible line. He did not lie down. He did not relax. He stood, watching the forest, then, occasionally, turning his head slightly toward Caleb, not to check on him, but to confirm something remained where it should be. Caleb noticed that. He always noticed Orion. "You could come in," Caleb said quietly. Orion did not move. The dog's ears flicked once. That was the answer. The hours passed without event. At first, Caleb sat with his back to a cold section of metal, one knee raised, one hand resting loosely near the knife at his pocket. His breathing slowed. His eyes adjusted. His mind did what it had always done in long waits. It moved. Not forward, backward. He tried not to let it. But the quiet made space, and space made room for memory. He focused on details instead. The structure, the faint hum of something in the ship's systems, not mechanical, not electrical, but present. The pattern of scratches he had seen earlier. The way the air inside never fully matched the temperature outside. All of it suggested a system he didn't yet understand. And Caleb didn't like systems he couldn't break down. Outside, the forest dimmed further. Inside, the ship held its own kind of darkness, denser, more contained. Caleb checked his watch. Time was moving normally. That was something. He shifted position slightly, stretching the tension out of his legs when Orion reacted. Not violently, not suddenly, just changed. The dog's body stiffened, head raised, eyes fixed. Not on the forest this time, on the ship. Caleb felt it then. Not a sound, not a movement, a shift. The kind that trained men learn to recognize without knowing why. He didn't turn immediately. He waited, listened. Nothing. Then, the radio came alive. Not with a burst, not with static building, just on, as if it had never been off. The faint light inside the cracked casing glowed steadier than before, casting a weak pulse across the surrounding metal. Caleb's jaw tightened. He didn't move toward it. He didn't touch it. He listened. At first it was only distortion, a low, uneven frequency that bent and broke across itself. Then, it formed. Clear enough, sharp enough. A voice. "Leave him." A pause. Then, "We don't have time." Caleb did not blink. He did not react. Not outwardly, but something inside him shifted hard enough that his breath caught before he could stop it. That sentence. That exact sentence. He had said it once, 12 years ago, in a place far from here, in a moment that had never left him, for a brief, impossible second. The world around him changed, not physically, not visibly, but completely. The metal floor beneath his boots felt like sand. The smell of rust faded, replaced by heat, smoke, and the sharp metallic scent of blood. And in the reflection of a darkened panel across the room, Caleb did not see the ship. He saw himself, younger, cleaner, standing over someone he could not bring himself to look at directly. Then, it was gone. The ship returned. The cold air returned. The silence returned. But Caleb remained exactly where he was. And now he knew. This place didn't show you things. It made you stand inside them. Orion moved. One step forward. Then another. The dog crossed the threshold for the first time since they had arrived. Caleb turned his head slightly. "Don't," he said quietly. But Orion ignored him. The German shepherd moved closer, placing himself not in front of Caleb, but beside him. Close enough that Caleb could feel the steady warmth of the dog's body through the cold air. Grounding, anchoring, real. The radio flickered again, but no voice followed, only silence. Caleb exhaled slowly, controlled, measured. He forced his eyes to focus on the present, on the structure, on the exits, on Orion. "Not real," he muttered, but the words lacked conviction, because it had felt real, more real than memory usually allowed itself to be. He stood, slowly, every movement deliberate. He walked toward the radio, not quickly, not aggressively, just enough to close the distance. He stopped an arm's length away, looked at it, then looked at the surrounding space. Nothing else had changed. No new movement, no new sound. He reached out and turned the dial. The static died instantly. Complete silence replaced it. No hum, no signal, nothing. Caleb held the position for a moment longer, then released the dial, stepped back. Behind him, Orion shifted slightly, but did not retreat. That mattered. If the dog had panicked, Caleb would have left immediately, but Orion stayed, alert, steady. The forest outside had gone fully dark now. The last traces of twilight gone. Only moonlight filtered through the trees, faint and distant. Caleb returned to his position near the entrance, sat, watched, listened. He did not sleep. Not that night. Not even close hours passed. Or maybe less. Time felt uneven, but not broken. Just heavier. Nothing else happened. No voices, no movement, no second event. But that was enough. Near dawn, the first pale light began to filter back through the trees. Orion was still awake. Still watching. Caleb stood, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. He looked back into the ship one last time. The radio sat silent. The interior unchanged. Cold. Still. But Caleb was not the same. He stepped out into the morning air, breathing deeper now, grounding himself in something that didn't shift under him. Orion followed, without hesitation. Caleb glanced down at him. "You felt that," he said quietly. Orion did not respond, but he didn't look away either. Caleb nodded once, more to himself than anything else. "We're not guessing anymore." He looked back at the ship, at the Aurora. This place isn't empty. And for the first time, he understood something clearly. It wasn't trying to scare him. It was trying to reach him. Morning did not feel like relief. It felt like permission. The kind that came after something had already begun. Caleb Vance stood at the edge of the ship's lower entrance, looking back into the hollow interior of the Aurora. The light was different in the morning. Cleaner, more revealing. But it did not make the place any easier to understand. If anything, it made it harder. Because now, there was no darkness to blame, no shadows to hide behind. Only structure, only evidence. Orion stood beside him, closer than usual. The German shepherd's posture had changed since the night before. He was no longer refusing the ship outright, but he was not accepting it either. His body remained aligned with Caleb's, not ahead of him, not behind him, equal. Watching, measuring, deciding. Caleb adjusted the strap of his pack. "All right," he said quietly. "We finish what we started." Orion's ears flicked once. Agreement. They moved inside together. This time, Orion did not stop at the threshold. He followed. Not willingly, but deliberately. Caleb retraced his path through the lower deck, each turn already mapped in his head. The radio remained silent now, the faint flicker from the previous day gone. The marks on the walls, the patterns carved into metal and floor, were clearer in daylight, more numerous than he had first realized, and all of them pointing inward. He reached the central room again, paused, listened. Nothing. Good. Then he moved toward the section of floor he had noticed the day before. The uneven plate, the seam, the hidden access. Caleb crouched, ran his fingers along the edge. There, a latch. Not obvious. Not meant to be found by accident. He slid his knife into the narrow gap and applied pressure. The metal resisted. Then, gave. The plate lifted with a low, grinding sound. Not loud, but deep. Like something opening that hadn't been opened in a very long time. A narrow space revealed itself beneath. Dark, compact, not a full room. A compartment. Caleb waited, listened, smelled the air. Different. Less decay, more contained. He looked at Orion. The dog's eyes were fixed on the opening. Not fearful, focused. Caleb lowered himself slowly into the space. The compartment was barely tall enough to stand fully upright. Reinforced walls, minimal equipment, a small cot, a water container, old storage crates, and someone sitting in the far corner. Caleb did not reach for his weapon. He did not speak. He observed. The man in the corner did not react immediately. He sat with his back against the wall, one knee raised, one arm resting across it. His frame was thin, but not weak. Worn down rather than frail. His clothes were layered and old. A brown canvas coat faded from years of use, a flannel shirt beneath it, gray work pants, boots that had been repaired more times than replaced. His hair was gray and uneven, his beard patchy but thick in places. His skin carried the pale tone of someone who had not seen enough direct sunlight in a long time. But it was his eyes that held Caleb's attention. Clear, focused, not confused, not broken. Just tired in a way that went beyond exhaustion. "Didn't think I'd see another one," the man said quietly. His voice was rough, unused, but steady. Caleb stayed where he was. "How long have you been here?" The man gave a small, humorless exhale. "Long enough to stop counting." Caleb stepped closer, slow, non-threatening. "Name?" The man's gaze didn't waver. "Rowan Hale." Up close, the details became sharper. Rowan was older, late 60s, maybe early 70s. His face carried deep lines, not just from age, but from repetition. The same thoughts, the same memories, carved into him over years. He didn't look like a man hiding. He looked like a man waiting. Orion stepped down into the compartment. Slow, controlled. The dog approached Rowan, not aggressively, not cautiously, but with something closer to recognition. Rowan's eyes shifted to him, and for the first time, something changed. Not fear, not surprise, relief. Small, fleeting, but real. Rowan reached out a hand, stopping just short of touching Orion. "I remember one like you," he said quietly, not to Caleb, to the dog. And he didn't leave either. Caleb watched that carefully, because that told him something important. Rowan wasn't alone in his memories. "What happened here?" Caleb asked. Rowan leaned his head back slightly against the metal wall. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, "The river changed," he said. "Used to run right through this place. Carried the ship in during a storm. Ground shifted, water pulled back, and she got stuck." Caleb nodded once. That part made sense. Rowan continued. That wasn't the problem. His gaze shifted slightly. Not to Caleb, not to Orion, but somewhere between them. The radio started picking up signals. Caleb didn't interrupt. "At first we thought it was interference. Old frequencies, crossed lines." Rowan's voice remained even, almost detached. But then, people started hearing things they recognized. He paused. Not names. Not calls. His jaw tightened slightly. Moments. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. "They didn't all react the same way," Rowan continued. "Some ignored it, some couldn't. The ones who couldn't started following it." "Following where?" Caleb asked. Rowan's eyes finally returned to him. "The forest." Silence stretched between them. Caleb spoke again. "You stayed." Rowan gave a faint nod. "Not at first." His gaze drifted again, farther this time. "I brought my son on the last run." The words came slower now, heavier. "Thought it'd be one more trip before I left the water for good." He was curious, always asking questions, always wanting to see what I saw. A faint, broken smile touched Rowan's face. "He heard it before I did." Caleb didn't move, didn't speak. One night, he got up. Rowan's hand tightened slightly against his knee. Didn't wake me. Didn't say anything. Just walked. The compartment felt smaller suddenly. I found the door open. Rowan swallowed once, tracks leading out. He looked at Caleb again. This time, there was something in his eyes. Not hope, not anger, just truth. I followed, a pause. Didn't catch him. Silence. "And you never left," Caleb said quietly. Rowan shook his head once. "No." "Why?" Rowan's answer came without hesitation. "Because if I leave..." He looked past Caleb toward the faint light above. "There's no one left to watch it." Caleb let that settle, then asked the only question that mattered. "Watch what?" Rowan's gaze shifted again. Not to the ship, not to the compartment, to the forest. "It doesn't take people," he said. "It keeps them." The words hung there, heavy, unmoving. Orion remained beside Rowan, still, present. Caleb exhaled slowly, then stood. "We're not done," he said. Rowan didn't respond, because he already knew. The forest did not change when they stepped out of the ship. That was the first thing Caleb Vance noticed. The light was still there, soft and filtered through tall northern pines. The air still carried the clean scent of damp leaves and cold earth. Somewhere far off, a bird called once, then fell silent again. Nothing about the forest announced danger, and yet, everything about it felt different. Rowan Hale moved ahead of them, slowly but with purpose. The older man's posture had a certain familiarity to it now that Caleb recognized, someone who had walked the same ground too many times, memorizing not just the path, but the consequences of stepping off it. Rowan did not carry much, just a worn canvas coat over his thin frame, flannel shirt underneath, and boots that had molded to his feet long ago. In daylight, the lines on his face seemed deeper, not from age alone, but from repetition, years of thinking the same thoughts, revisiting the same memories, never quite escaping them. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew they were following. "The path's not marked," Rowan said quietly, his voice steady, almost conversational. "Not in any way you'd recognize." Caleb walked a few steps behind him, Orion close at his side. "Then how do you follow it?" Rowan paused briefly, glancing over his shoulder just enough for Caleb to see the faintest hint of something like dry humor. "You don't." Then he continued forward. "You avoid leaving it." That answer stayed with Caleb longer than he expected. The ground shifted underfoot as they moved deeper. Not dramatically, subtly. The soil softened in places, hardened in others. The trees grew closer together, then spread out again. Light bent differently through the branches, creating patterns that looked almost deliberate, like corridors formed not by design but by repetition. Caleb tracked everything: spacing, angles, sound. Nothing felt random. Orion's behavior changed as well. The German shepherd moved closer than usual, his shoulder occasionally brushing Caleb's leg. His ears remained forward, but his head turned more often now, checking, recalculating, adjusting. Not reacting to threats, reacting to something else, something internal. Rowan slowed, then stopped. "This is where it starts," he said. Caleb stepped up beside him. The path ahead looked no different from what they had just walked. Trees, light, shadow, nothing unusual. "What starts?" Caleb asked. Rowan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured forward. "Walk!" Caleb didn't like that. But he stepped forward anyway. Orion followed instantly. The first few steps felt normal. Ground solid, air steady, nothing wrong. Then, something shifted. It wasn't visible, it wasn't audible. But Caleb felt it. Like a pressure change behind his eyes, like stepping from one space into another without crossing anything physical. His breathing slowed, unintentionally. The forest ahead seemed clearer, not brighter, just easier to focus on. And then, he saw it. Not in front of him, not around him, inside him. A memory, but not distant, not faded. Close. He stood in a different place. Sand under his boots, heat pressing against his skin, the smell of dust and smoke filling the air. A man on the ground, bleeding, still alive, looking at him, not accusing, not pleading, just waiting. Caleb knew this moment, every detail, every second of it. He had lived it. But this time, it wasn't over. The man moved. His hand lifted slightly. His eyes met Caleb's. And for the first time, he spoke. "You still have time." The words hit harder than anything Caleb had expected, because they had never been spoken before. Not then, not in reality. This wasn't memory. This was something else. Something offering change. Caleb stepped forward. The forest behind him disappeared. He could feel it. The chance. The moment he had replayed in his mind for years, over and over again. The one decision he had never been able to undo. One more step, Orion moved. Not fast, not aggressive. He stepped directly in front of Caleb, blocked him. Caleb stopped, not because he wanted to, because he couldn't move through the dog. Orion didn't growl, didn't bark. He just stood there, solid, unmoving, eyes locked on Caleb's. And in those eyes, there was no confusion, no doubt, only truth. The forest flickered. The heat faded. The sand dissolved. Caleb stood still, breathing hard now. The memory collapsed. And he was back. Back in the forest. Back on the path. Orion still standing in front of him. Rowan watching from a few steps ahead. Neither of them had moved. Caleb exhaled sharply, ran a hand over his face. "Not real," he said under his breath. Rowan shook his head slowly. "Real enough." Caleb looked at him. "It doesn't show you what happened," Rowan continued. "It shows you what you wish had." Silence settled between them. Caleb didn't argue, because that felt true, more true than he was comfortable admitting. They continued forward, slower now, more deliberate. The forest didn't press again, not the same way, but Caleb could feel it watching, not like a predator, like a question. After some distance, Rowan stopped again. "This is the last part," he said. Caleb stepped beside him. Ahead, the trees thinned slightly. The light opened. "You keep going," Rowan said, "and you'll walk out." Caleb studied him. "You're not coming?" Rowan shook his head. "No." "Why?" Rowan looked past him, back toward the direction of the ship. "Because it doesn't end out there." His voice was calm, certain. "It ends here." Caleb understood, not fully, but enough. Orion shifted slightly beside him, not pulling forward, not pushing back, waiting. Caleb looked at the open path, then at Rowan, then down at Orion. The forest was quiet again, normal. No pressure, no pull, just a choice. Caleb nodded once. "All right." He turned, started forward. Orion moved with him instantly. Neither of them looked back. The forest did not follow them. That was the first truth Caleb Vance accepted. It stayed where it had always been, rooted, silent, watching. But it did not reach beyond its own boundaries. As he and Orion crossed the invisible edge where the trees thinned and the ground began to level into something more familiar, the weight that had settled behind his ribs began, slowly, to lift. Not all at once, not completely, but enough. The morning air beyond the forest felt different, cleaner, lighter. The wind moved freely here, carrying the scent of open land instead of damp bark and buried water. The sky stretched wider, pale blue breaking through the last strands of mist. Caleb didn't stop walking, he didn't look back. Not because he was afraid to, because he didn't need to. Orion walked beside him, close but not pressed in. The German shepherd's posture had changed again. His ears were no longer fixed forward. His movements were looser now, less calculated, more natural, not relaxed, but no longer braced. That was enough. They reached the old service road by mid-morning, gravel underfoot, tire tracks, faint but present, a sign that the world outside the forest still existed, still functioned, still moved forward. Caleb paused there, just for a moment. He adjusted the strap of his half-track backpack, shifting the weight across his shoulders. The familiar pressure grounded him, real, physical, measurable. He glanced down at Orion. The dog looked back at him, steady, present. "All right," Caleb said quietly. Not a command, a confirmation. They walked on. The road curved slightly, leading toward the ranger station where they had first arrived. The distance felt shorter now, though Caleb knew it wasn't. It just felt that way, because he was no longer carrying the same weight. He saw her before she spoke. Lila Mercer stood near the porch of the station, arms crossed loosely, watching the road. She had changed nothing about her appearance. Same moss-green parka, same practical stance. But there was something in her posture that suggested she had been waiting longer than she wanted to admit. When she saw Caleb, she didn't move immediately. She studied him. Then Orion. Then the empty space behind them. "You made it out?" she said. Her voice was neutral, but her eyes weren't. Caleb stopped a few feet away. "Yeah." Lila tilted her head slightly. "That all you're going to say?" Caleb exhaled through his nose, the faintest trace of dry humor passing through him. "Pretty much." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. "You didn't go all the way in," she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb didn't answer, because that depended on how someone defined in. Lila shifted her weight, stepping off the porch. "You're not the first one to come through here like that," she said. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Lila hesitated, then spoke. "Every few years, someone shows up." Her tone was steady, careful. "Walks into that forest, stays longer than they should." She glanced toward the tree line. "Some don't come back." A pause. "And the ones who do?" She looked at Caleb again. "They don't talk about it." Caleb let that settle, then gave a small nod. "Sounds about right." Lila studied him for another second. Then her gaze shifted to Orion. "He's the reason, isn't he?" Caleb followed her eyes. The German shepherd stood beside him, calm now, but still aware in a way that never fully faded. "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. Lila gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Figured." For a brief moment, Orion turned his head. Not toward the road, not toward the station, back toward the forest. His body didn't tense. He didn't move forward. He just looked. And in that look, there was no warning, no urgency, only acknowledgement, as if something inside the forest had looked back. Then Orion turned away, and the moment passed. Lila didn't notice, but Caleb did. He didn't speak, because whatever that was, it wasn't for her. The silence between them stretched comfortably after that. No more questions, no more explanations. Lila stepped back toward the station. "You heading out?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Yeah." She hesitated, then added, "Road gets rough about 10 miles south. Watch the turn near the old bridge." Caleb gave a slight nod. "Appreciate it." She looked like she wanted to say more, but didn't. Instead, she stepped aside, letting him pass. Caleb and Orion continued down the road. The sound of gravel under their boots faded into the open space ahead. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The further they walked, the more the forest receded behind them. Not physically, but in presence. The air felt wider. The world felt simpler. But Caleb knew better. Some things didn't disappear. They just stopped asking for attention. By midday, the road opened into a wider stretch of land. Fields, low hills, a distant line of trees marking the horizon. Caleb stopped there. Not because he had to, because he chose to. He turned slightly, not fully, just enough to look back over his shoulder. The forest stood in the distance, quiet, still, unchanged. No ship, no sign, nothing that would tell anyone what existed beyond those trees. He held that gaze for a moment. Then he turned away. Fully. And that mattered. He reached down and placed his hand against Orion's neck. The dog didn't move, didn't react, but leaned into it. Just slightly. A simple contact. Nothing dramatic, nothing spoken. But for Caleb, it was the first time in a long time that the gesture meant something different. He wasn't grounding himself. He wasn't checking reality. He was choosing it. "I heard it," Caleb said quietly. Orion remained still. Caleb exhaled once. "And I didn't follow." The wind moved across the field, carrying the sound away. Behind them, far beyond sight, the aurora remained where it had always been. Silent. Not because it was gone, but because, for now, no one was listening. There are places in this world that don't trap the body, but test the soul. And sometimes, what feels like darkness is not there to destroy us, but to reveal what we are still holding on to. Caleb walked out of that forest, not because he was stronger, but because he chose to let go. Maybe that is what grace looks like. Not a loud miracle, not a voice from the sky, but a quiet moment where something inside you says, "You don't have to carry this anymore." And maybe, just maybe, that moment is not something we create ourselves. Maybe it is given. A small mercy, a second chance, a reminder from God that even in the deepest places of our lives, we are never truly alone. In our everyday lives, we all carry something. Regret, guilt, pain we don't talk about. And sometimes, like Caleb, we stand at a crossroads where we can either keep following the past or choose to step forward. If this story meant something to you, take a moment today. Reach out to someone, forgive something, or simply be still long enough to hear what your heart has been trying to tell you. If you believe in second chances, share this story with someone who might need it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if stories like this speak to you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and give you peace in the places where you need it most.